Good morning. Uncle Lou here. So welcome to today's edition of Coffee Talk with Uncle Lou. Of course, this is the groundbreaking show I do a couple of times a week here, where I drink coffee and talk to you. Well, that's hot. Anyway, how's everyone doing? I'm sure you're doing just fine. Uncle Lou's good too. Thanks for asking. But I'm going to talk a little college football today. So if that's not something that interests you, go ahead and thumbs down the video and quit watching now, because the rest of it will be about college football. A couple of different things. But, well, I see that, yet another person in the long line of people, has come out with a video bashing the SEC. Pretty much par for the course over the last 3 or 4 years. But when you're on top of the mountain, like the SEC is, that's what happens. Everyone hates a winner, when the Yankees go on a run, everyone hates the Yankees. It is what it is. But it almost gets to the point where I don't even see a point in defending the SEC. I mean, anybody with any sense at all can spend 5-10 minutes on Google and easily discover which conference is the best conference, particularly in football. But in athletics in general, college athletics in general, the SEC just dominates. We're going to stick to mainly football for the purposes of this video, though. True, SEC has not won the national title in the last 2 years. Okay. But we did win it 8 years in a row, so so that would make it 8 out of the last 10. But people just love to bash the SEC, and they look for they'll pull out any little insignificant stat or some random fact to try to prove that the SEC is not the best conference in college football. You're just making yourself look ridiculous. No reasonable human being can argue that the SEC is not the best football conference. I don't know if you're just blinded by your hatred of the SEC, or, some of you, may actually feel that way. I don't know. But the SEC is the king of the hill in college football. Stop kidding yourself. The litany of excuses or reasons that you want to come up with of why they're not is just ridiculous. The latest fad now is just to accuse everyone of being biased towards the SEC, and that's the only reason the SEC does this, or that's the only reason the SEC gets that. People are biased. ESPN is biased towards the SEC. The people that do the polls are biased towards the SEC. The bowl selection committees are biased towards the SEC. The playoff committee last year, biased towards the SEC. You want to know who's really biased towards the SEC? None of those other people you mentioned are biased against the SEC, but you want to know who's really biased towards the SEC? The NFL. The NFL is biased towards the SEC. 9 drafts in a row. That's not a fluke, people. That's not a fluke. That's not a coincidence. 9 drafts in a row, the SEC has led all conferences in terms of number of players drafted. 9 years in a row. That's not a coincidence. The best high school football players in America dream of playing in the SEC. Period. Sure, Other conferences and schools at other conferences are going to get good players. There's plenty of good players to go around. But the majority of players are going to the SEC, period. There is no arguing that. The NFL is a billion-dollar business. No NFL team is drafting their players based on some sort of ESPN highlight reel of them, okay? They pay their scouts, their personnel departments, they pay these people lots of money to evaluate potential players. 9 years in a row, NFL teams have chosen to draft SEC players over players from every other conference. I don't see that trend stopping anytime soon. The SEC is dominant. The more you hate, the more ridiculous you look. People are all over the SEC, particularly last year. Because the SEC lost some high-profile bowl games, which that's true. There's no denying that. Alabama lost to Ohio State. I could go through the list. Particularly the SEC West lost some high-profile bowl games. Okay, I'll give that to you. But the SEC last year tied its own record for most bowl wins in a season. So, top to bottom, the SEC is still dominating you. They're still better than you, too. The SEC won more bowl games last year than any other conference has ever won in any other year, period. The only other conference that's won that many games is the SEC. They tied their own record. So, yeah, the SEC had a down year last year by SEC standards. Still better than every other team. Every other conference. So, get off your high horse about the SEC dominance is dead and the SEC run is over. Look, they won 8 titles in a row. Is the SEC going to win the national title in college football every single year? No. But the SEC is winning more titles than every other conference combined. Combined! So, I just don't understand. And another thing that came up last year is ESPN has SEC bias. ESPN started an SEC network to give extra coverage to the SEC, and, that creates an unfair advantage for the SEC, and blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what was around years before the SEC network? The Longhorn Network! That's right. Now, let's take a look back at the brief history of the Texas Longhorns. Ever since ESPN and the University of Texas created this Longhorn Network, and I don't know, how long ago was that? 5, 6, 7 years ago, whatever it was, something like that. Ever since ESPN and the University of Texas created this Longhorn Network, the Texas program has done nothing but go consistently downhill. Down. So, where's the bias? Where's the bias towards the University of Texas from ESPN? How come when ESPN started the Longhorn Network, that didn't give some sort of unfair advantage to Texas, but now ESPN starts an SEC network, and it's the end of the world. You people are crying, bitching and moaning that it's not fair. ESPN has this SEC network, blah, blah, blah. They've had a Longhorn Network for years, and it's done nothing for the University of Texas. So I don't want to hear that just because ESPN starts an SEC network channel, that somehow gives the SEC an unfair advantage against other conferences or other teams, when it didn't do that for the University of Texas. They've got consistently worse ever since they started the Longhorn Network. I mean, how many people do you see on YouTube making videos saying that the Big 12 is not the best conference? The Big 12 is not the best conference anymore. The Big 12 is not the best conference. Or the ACC is not the best conference. The ACC is dead. The ACC is not the best conference anymore. Or the Big 10 is not the best conference anymore. The Pac-12 is not the best. How many people do you see making videos bashing those other conferences? Zero. None. What's the point? But everybody wants to bash the SEC because when you're on top, that's what happens. But you can't argue with the numbers. High school kids want to play in the SEC. The SEC is dominating the national championship scene 8 out of the last 10 years. We haven't won it the last 2 years. Big deal. The NFL is in love with the SEC. Most players drafted 9 years straight. This argument that your conference, whatever conference that is, or any other conference is somehow better than the SEC, or the SEC is dead, or something like that, is just ridiculous. Look at the numbers. The numbers don't lie. The SEC has been, is, and will continue to be the dominant conference in college football for the foreseeable future. Best thing you can do is learn to accept that, learn to deal with that. Yep. And in the meantime, we'll keep stacking up championships and NFL draftees while you guys continue to complain that it's ESPN's fault that the SEC is kicking your ass year in and year out.